I'm Nick Smith. I'm a licensed physical therapist and strength and conditioning coach, and I want to talk about a further deep dive from the physical therapy standpoint of the sissy squat or the KOT squat that Ben Patrick talked about. And so, Ben did an awesome job of breaking down like what is actually going down at the knee joint in order to complete the KOT squat or the ATG squat and getting into those certain positions. But one of the other things that's sometimes overlooked, and he could have deep dived into this if he had more time, is to get into what's actually occurring at the foot and ankle. So when you're getting into this position and you're hovering, most of your weight is actually through this big toe here. Now, if you're talking about actual physiological range of motion, what is actually supposed to happen, you should be able to get about 60 degrees of extension at that big toe. Now, it's one thing to be able to do it stretching like this, but can you keep pressure, your entire body weight, over this one joint through that motion? And that, most people, they can't. So a way that we could kind of modify that end position right before the transition where you're maximally through the toes and transitioning down into the knees, we can kind of peel it back a little bit. We can give a regression way to increase the mobility of our great toe in a decreased weight bearing position. So essentially what we're gonna do is we're gonna mimic the exact same position, but limit the weight bearing. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna come up onto the toes here. If you can see, most of my weight is over the toes. And I'm feeling a nice little stretch through the big toe here. And then what I can do to make this a little more spicy is I'm gonna actively lift my toe off the ground. And what you should see is the tendon of the extensor hallucis longus. That's what actually lifts your toe up. And you can see that big tendon. That is actually what drives being able to lift your foot up. It's one of those main muscles. So what I want you to try to do is you're gonna get into that end range position and then try to lift it and relax. Lift it, relax, lift it, relax. And after you do a few more reps, then I wanna take you up the available slack. I wanna stretch it a little bit more. And then you can retrain in those different positions. You may not get as much clearance, you may not be able to lift the toe up, but you're gonna see that tendon as your reference point. So if you can see that tendon activating, you know you're doing it right. Now the other component of being able to perform this KOT squat is making sure that you have maximal availability at the ankle joint or the talocrural joint. Now, the ankle joint is what we call triplanar. It means that it moves in 3 different directions. So if we're looking about how our knees translate or move forward over the toes, they can translate towards the pinky toe or the 5th toe. They can go towards the middle between the 2nd and 3rd toes, and then over the big toe. So when we're training the ankle availability, we want to go into the areas where it's what I call most sticky, or it's the hardest to go into. What part of the ankle is providing the most amount of resistance? So when we're going over this, the key points are making sure that our heel or our calcaneus is in contact with the floor and making sure that our knees indeed go over our toes. So what you're going to notice is if you're playing with it, certain areas you can see that's my limitation. My ankle can't go any further without me stepping backwards. So I may not be able to get into this position without working on my ankle mobility a little bit more. And I know that's my breakdown for me. So if I were to complete this exercise, I would be able to do it, but it won't look as smooth as Ben does. Ben does it perfectly. So if I were to want to work on this more, I would go into the areas where it feels the most restricted and get weight over it. And you can see my heel starting to come up, so I want to back off a little bit. I feel most of the tension through the front of my ankle joint here. And I'm just going to glide over those areas where it feels more restrictive. So for me, going over the middle of my foot, this direction, and going towards the outside is where I feel the most resistance. And I'm gonna play with this until I feel like I can get into that position a little bit better. So if you were to observe my motion of doing the actual squat itself, it's likely that my knee will want to dive in and go towards the path of least resistance. And that's what will allow me to do the position, but it won't be quite right. So this is something that you can address working on the big toe and making sure that the ankle has sufficient mobility and sufficient control that you can be able to perform this KOT squat.